Spectrovision Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Hello, dear listener. I hope you are well. Right now, we are going through a tipping point. People are moving into their hearts like never before. We are in a process of reclaiming our humanity, I believe, as we can no longer turn away from what lies in our shadow. It has risen above the surface and demands to be acknowledged. Even in the week between me releasing this to patrons and me releasing on general release, there's just a real sense of heavy grief. And I wanted to record this extra bit to acknowledge and honour that I'm finding it very hard. And I know many other people who are finding this very hard. And it's just, we're in a state of incredulity that what is happening can even be happening, and that the people that are meant to be and systems that are meant to be put in place so that they can help are just not helping. And what I'm also with is just the love that people are sharing with one another when they are coming together in grief over this dreadful world situation. And I really feel that, as I say, there is something coming through. There's something else forming, and I do believe that we will reclaim our humanity, reclaim our world. And I pray that those who are suffering are able to live their lives in peace, like everyone has as part of their basic human right. And so I pray for those who cannot feel this in their hearts yet. I really pray that they somehow find the compassion within themselves, the humanity within themselves, to do something and to make the changes that are necessary immediately. I know that Pam Gregory has and I've mentioned this before, a Sunday night, an every night gathering. It started as a Sunday night gathering for people to light a candle at 7 p.m. British London time to pray in whatever or meditate, whatever form of connection they use in order to join with others around the world who are sending love to the situation and love to all of those involved for the end of suffering. And that's something that we can all do, but you don't need to join up to anything. She just says, do it in your own way at home, and just feel in your heart how that is connecting in with what everyone else is doing. So that's something that we can do. And also then kind of looking at the reflections on our own lives, that's really been with me as well, about how patient I am with others, how compassionate I am with others or not, what that looks like for my interactions with people on a daily basis. All these things, there's kind of the really big stuff going on in the world, which is just unbearable. And then there's, the small changes that we can make, which of course send out ripples in the world. So let's hold those in suffering in mind and in our hearts, and let's also do what we can. And I hope you're all okay. Just know that you're not alone. If you're feeling alone with this right now, you're not alone. And in fact, on that, one thing that has really helped me is going to my local Buddhist centre where they offer free meditation. I'm not Buddhist, but I really appreciate the space there. I'm sure most of the people that go to that free meditation session are not Buddhists either. We're just all people with our own jobs and lives and things going on that find coming together in peace, on an evening in the week for an hour and a half just makes a huge difference to our capacity to live our lives at a time that is just so hard. So I just offer that, look up your local area. There will be a Buddhist centre offering, as I say, freely available meditation. In hours they teach, they're just short 10-minute bursts of meditation, different ones. Sometimes there's always readings, there's a breath meditation, there's a body scan, and it's just that little beacon of peace in my week that just means everything. So I hope that's of help. When someone goes through a transformation, they often face the darkness head on, sometimes in a shocking way. It must be acknowledged before it's able to be integrated. And I feel that's where we are right now at this point in our history. And this charged time we're living through is not for flagellating ourselves or giving up hope, even though we do face horrors and it is very hard to take. Do not give up hope. You are living here at this time for a reason, and we are here to help birth something new for our world. So take care of your well-being in whichever way resources your soul, and please aid others, even in some small way, no matter what that is. This conversation with Rose Aurora was an absolute delight. Rose is a fairy sorceress and seer. She shares some of her early experiences with spirits in our chat, the meaning and history of fairy traditions, lineages, and original mythologies. And Rose also describes some of her interactions with the good people. She also warns us why we should not seek out a fairy beau. In the full-length version exclusively on Patreon, Rose talks about the different kinds of fairies that she meets and offers her sense of where we are at the current time in terms of human and fairy connections. We also discuss what fairies might think of AI. So that extra section is on Patreon, where you can join for just the cost of a coffee per month. A huge thanks to my patrons, without whom this project would not be able to exist. And our conversations, shares, and recommendations in the Discord always lift my day. On Patreon, you'll get access to the member Discord channels. And there is, of course, tons of exclusive bonus episodes, which I make each month for the group. When you join as a member of the crew, you'll get access to our monthly live chats where we discuss various topics. So a couple of months back, we held a group discussion on the telepathy tapes, and then more recently we shared our synchronicity experiences. And this month's coming discussion will be about fairies in the home, and that's because there's an episode coming up on that theme in the coming weeks. One of the highlights of the group for me is our monthly Zooms, where members of the group themselves share their skills or areas of interest in a presentation or workshop for the rest of the group. And recently we learned about communicating with plants with our resident folklore forager, Emily Wilde. These are recorded. Look up the collections, you'll find them all there. And I'm also excited to announce that this year's in-person event for members is being held in Glastonbury in September. Previously, we've met in the Cotswolds for a walk and a picnic, and then last year we had a trip to Rendlesham Forest and Sutton Hoo, and it was just such a brilliant day. If you can support, then please do join us on Patreon. If you can't join us right now, it would be really helpful if you can leave a review and give it a rating, which really helps if you add that wherever you listen to your podcasts. A word also about what is called the free members section on Patreon, as I worry about that title being misleading. This used to be a simple option to become a follower of a creator on Patreon, which was a much more accurate description. But what ends up happening is that people come to Patreon and they join the free section instead of the member section. And unfortunately, it's really just kind of signing your details to Patreon without receiving anything in return. So instead, if you would like to get involved in the group and support the podcast, then please join the members group. Thank you very much for listening. I really hope you enjoy this conversation, and please be sure to follow Rose on Instagram at Rose Auroras and contact her on her website at roseauroras.com. I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode. You can always contact me at scarlettofthefae at gmail.com. That's Scarlet with 2 T's and Fae, F-A-E. I am a little behind with my admin at the moment, but I do reply. So do ping me again if you haven't heard back from me. But I am working to catch up with all my emails. Sending love to you, dear listener. And just remember that we are moving towards better times. And I feel that these other worlds are aiding us in that, particularly through nature. So take care of yourselves and take care of each other. See you next time. Lastly, one quick note about the audio. Apologies, because when I was recording, there was something wrong with my mic and it didn't pick up my audio properly. So it's kind of picked it up from the main computer instead of my mic. It does kind of improve as the conversation goes on, but apologies for the kind of tinny, echoey sound in my audio. I am also getting to the point where I feel like I could really do a hand with the production. So if there is anybody out there that feels that they would like to help me with that, please get in touch at scarlettofthefae.com. Time to renovate. Welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. My name's Jo Hickey Hall, and with me this time is a guest that I've been meaning to speak to for so long now, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome her to the show. It's Rose Aurora, Sorceress and Fairy Seer. I've listened to a number of interviews with Rose over the last year, and Radical Elf Fame is a particularly great favourite of mine. It was a really beautiful interview, and also with Spirit Box. And it's just delightful to welcome you here, Rose.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. As you know, I love the podcast and I love the work that you're doing, and it's an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Well, it's great to have you here because, you know, it would be so nice to introduce our listeners to what it is that you do, because, well, perhaps you can start by describing what a sorceress and fairy seer does.
Yeah, sure. So I guess, you know, I tend to kind of use the word sorceress to denote that I practice magic. I have magical training. Obviously, my main tradition is a Celtic fairy tradition, but I've also been trained in the Scandinavian system of folk magic and sorcery called Trolldom. I was an apprentice of, or I guess I still am technically, an apprentice of Johannes Gårdbäck, who wrote a book called Trolldom that I definitely encourage people to check into and take a look at if they're interested in Norse folk practices, things like that. But yeah, so I kind of tend to use the word sorceress because I feel it has a little less baggage than something like the word witch. I don't mind if people call me a witch, and it definitely is a term that I would use for myself in a more personal context, I think. But you know, it's definitely a term that has some baggage, especially for a lot of people culturally. So I tend to just kind of go with the word sorceress to mean, you know, I practice magic, and, you know, I've trained in those arts and things like that. Fairy seer is something that I also kind of defer to more publicly because I've also kind of used the term fairy worker to, you know, kind of not only express that I see those beings, but also, work with them in a magical capacity, and have a close relationship with them over many years, and have training, and knowledge of how to kind of, conduct a magical, and spiritual relationship with those types of beings. Some people, fairy witch would be fine too. Again, like, if people call me that or some other term, like, I'm totally fine with that. It's just kind of, I just sort of have chosen those ones as, public terms to kind of, sum things up a little bit. So, but what I do, in my work, cause I do have, services that I offer to the public. Some of the things include, and my specialty includes, being sort of a mediator, I guess, between humans and the good folk, the fairies, as well as other kind of non-human beings, such as, trolls, the elves, which are kind of, in many ways, the Scandinavian equivalent of the fairies. And, helping people if they, should have issues arise with, these non-human beings, or, other situations that may occur. As we know, these beings do interact with humans, and sometimes it's wonderful and a blessing, and sometimes it can be not so great for the humans. So, and all manner of things in between. So that's kind of my specialty, and what I'm most known for in my work. But I also do kind of the basic witch for hire stuff, readings and spell work and things like that. So. And I also teach people, I was basically, when I was apprenticed under Johannes, I was basically kind of certified to go out there and, teach people scrying and trolldom and things like that. So I do that as well.
How did you come into contact with Johannes?
With Johannes, it's funny because I kind of met him through a friend. Like, they introduced me to some of his classes. And I guess I should say they told me about his classes. I knew of his book, and I knew of his work, but I basically got in contact with him through that. And then, spoke to him about apprenticing with him, and things kind of just, the ball was sort of rolled through that means. So, and I'm really grateful. The Trolldom practice, and what I've learned from him has been really invaluable to not just me personally and the magical work and spiritual work that I do for myself and, my friends and family, but also definitely for my clients as well. So, and of course, it's given me that kind of extra cultural context, of working with the Norse spirits, whether it's the elves, trolls, as well as the Norse gods and things like that. I already had a relationship with beings that I would term elves before I met Johannes, but it was wonderful to kind of dig into the cultural practices of Sweden with him and learn those traditional methods, as well as, things like spell work, healing, and all that kind of good stuff.
Oh, yeah, there's so much there I want to learn about. But with your relationship with elves, then, you mentioned there that you already had a kind of pre-existing relationship with elves. Could you describe how that came about and what that was like?
Well, I should probably start by sort of going way back towards the beginning a little bit. There is definitely some things that I have to kind of details that I have to omit because I have secrecy oaths and taboos. But I'll kind of, just work around that as I usually try to do.
Yeah.
But so I was, my fairy tradition, it's something that I was actually born into. And I know that's kind of, some people kind of raise their eyebrows at that because I think it's maybe not the way that everybody kind of comes into their magical practice or spiritual practice. It's not the same situation for everyone. But, some of my earliest memories are of spirits, including the fairies. And then not long after that, the actual magical aspects of what I do now already started to come into play. I think I was probably 7 or 8 years old the first time I really can remember at least doing a spell, something like that. So this has pretty much been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. And it's, the fairy tradition that I am a part of. These spirits are sort of seen as kin and teachers, and not just I guess something to kind of avoid, which is sort of in a lot of the modern outlooks, I guess you could say, in a lot of the Celtic regions, it's sort of something to be avoided, right? Or at least something to placate, so that they, the good folk don't bother you, or, steal your children, or, tie your hair in knots at night, things like that. But, there's a sort of working relationship and a relationship of veneration, but definitely something more akin to, a familial or kinship. And so, obviously there are still risks and dangers in that. And one thing that, we're always taught, and that I always try to pass on to other people, is that, these spirits aren't human. Obviously, there is some crossover with human dead, but because these spirits are not human, they don't have the same way of thinking about things that a human being does. And they're not going to have the same outlook on various things. And so it's important to keep that in mind, so that one doesn't become too comfortable. Even if someone has a relationship with these beings that's very positive and wonderful, and blessed, which it certainly can be, it's important to keep that in mind always, still, that they do not have the same outlook on things that a human will. And, just for safety's sake, and not to be surprised by strange behaviors that may occur from those beings. But, that's one of the reasons why it's really important, if somebody, is going to sort of try to reach out to these beings, so that they're really well informed. The folklore is probably the best resource for somebody if they don't have, a teacher or something like that. But obviously there are some good books out there. Anything by Catherine Briggs is wonderful. And of course, Morgan Daimler is really a wonderful resource, especially for stuff about the Irish lore. But and getting back to your original question, I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but getting back to your original question. So I had experiences with, fairy beings from the time I was very little. And then later on, I became acquainted through some kind of crossover interactions with beings that I would classify as elves, which are kind of, again, sort of the equivalent, Scandinavian equivalent of the fairies. So, there's some differences, but for the most part, they're very similar, and have a lot of the similar taboos and behaviors and abilities and things like that. So, I had a Norse practice before that. Before I met Johannes, but working with him and learning the traditional methods that he taught me, really just kind of reinforced those relationships and made things even better. So hopefully that answered your question.
And I don't know whether you're able to describe kind of an early interaction with any kind of other world. It doesn't necessarily, there might be experiences that you want to keep personal, and we really need to respect that. If anybody out there listening to this show, they often hear people talking about their experiences, and I think it's really important to remember that actually not all of them feel, or not everybody feels okay to share those. And for some people, they feel like very private, personal experiences that are not to be shared. And I always say that to people that write to me, and they, they'll tell me about an experience, and, sometimes I won't, I'll make sure to say to them, there is never any pressure to share your experience. And it's very important to say that, because it has to feel right. It has to feel. No two ways about it. It's a very personal thing. And for some people, that might change over time. And for other people, it will never change. They just, it feels like something that has to be kept private. But so I'm saying the same to you now, that are you able to describe, any kind of otherworld experiences that you'd had as a child, but, something that you feel that you want to share and feeling no pressure to do so?
Yeah. Before I also dive into that too, I'm glad that you brought that up too, because, the idea of secrecy and things like that. And then of course it kind of gets into also like not bragging and things like that. That's definitely something that is in a lot of the folklore, as well. This idea that, if you tell about the blessings that the fairies give you, that then they could, those blessings could disappear, or that the fairies could kind of go, never mind, so I definitely would recommend that people do what you said, if they're thinking about sharing those things, does it feel right to do so, or, if a fairy being flat out told somebody, hey, don't tell anybody about, and tell anybody about this, maybe don't, so, something definitely to think about for anybody who's kind of, experiencing things. But for me, I might not be able to go into some of the details, but I can say that when I say that some of my earliest experiences were of fairy beings, I can say that it was not something very, it was not ambiguous. It was very much like there is a 3D person standing there, and it's quite obvious that that's not a human person, even though they have like a humanoid physical form. There are things that are not, that are sort of a tip off that it's not a human, whether it's, light emerging from their body, or some other sort of strange features that's, or what might even be considered like a deformity, which of course is also something that kind of pops up in the folklore, the idea that a fairy being can have like, hooves for feet, or in some of the Scandinavian stuff, you see this idea that the elves or certain nature beings can have like a hollow back, almost like their back is a tree, something like that. So, and also, a lot of other things as well. The dead were quite present as well, human dead. And that was actually I would say the experiences with the dead when I was a child were a lot more jarring, I think, actually, even than the ones with the fairies, because the dead tend to be a little, they love attention, from living people, I think. And so, and knowing that I could see them and that I could hear them speaking to me, it would kind of overwhelm me at times, because, I would wake up at 3 a.m. and there's a dead person standing next to my bed, and I'm like, so that I think probably my experiences with the human spirits, the human dead spirits, were probably a little more, jarring, a little more exasperating. And then of course, other things, some of the more interesting things, unfortunately, I can't talk about, but like the, things like, what a lot of other people might experience when it comes to sort of paranormal or supernatural phenomena, objects moving, sleep paralysis. I had a lot of astral projection, involuntary astral projection stuff that happened when I was a kid as well, and sort of being taken out of my body, and not only meeting with spirits or having interactions with otherworldly beings in that way as well, but, sort of being brought into that world. So into their world, I guess I should say. So there was definitely, but yeah, I do want to emphasize, like, it was very not ambiguous, it was very, there was a lot of like physical manifestations and things like that, which is something that, I think a lot of people, when they do have experiences, especially of fairy beings, can be quite shocking at just how capable they are of physically manifesting, and looking like there is literally a person standing there in the room with me, and I can touch them and they can touch me, and, they're 3-dimensional. So That definitely is something that is, I think, is one of the things that actually kind of sets them apart from a lot of other types of spirits, especially like human dead. Human dead tend to have a little more effort they have to put in order to do physical manifestations and things like that, whereas the fair folk definitely seem to have a much easier time doing that. And doing things like, moving things and moving people and, touching people and sort of, affecting the physical world. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I kind of really sympathize with the astral travel as children, and especially having people that have passed over turning up. A lot of us experience that. A lot of us that have experiences in later life. It's because, as you and I know, we've had them since we were very little. We've had these connections, and we never really kind of, had a point where we completely cut ourselves off from that world. We somehow it kind of runs through us, and I think one of those examples for many people is this form of astral travel when we were kids, and it's the more people I speak to, I find that is a feature of people who have encounters in later life, that they have this memory as children of either like levitation or astral projection, astral travel, and beings turning up in their home. It's like whether they've gone to the toilet at night and they've seen a being in the hallway or in their bathroom, or things turning up in the bedroom. It's something that I hear again and again, and for a lot of people that just sounds like the stuff of dreams or films or fairy tales, but it's just a feature of what it is to be human and having an interaction with otherworld. And and when you were experiencing all of this, I mean, you come from a lineage. Could you talk a little about that? No, I'm just wondering, maybe unlike other people, if you were having these experiences, you might have been able to talk to people about that, rather than sort of many of us are, sometimes left alone with that, with well-meaning parents that don't quite understand. So did you find that this was something that somebody could help you make sense of that?
Yes and no. There were, I'm trying to think of how I can phrase it without getting in trouble. So I think, one of the things, I say yes and no just because, yes, there's people I could talk to, but they're also, especially within my lineage, and I think within a lot of other similar sort of situations and traditions, is that a lot of the most important sort of communication and information and then of course teaching comes from the spirits themselves. And so a lot of times there would be things that would happen, and a spirit would be part of the interaction or the experience, and I might kind of ask, well, what's the deal with this, or talk to somebody about it, and it was kind of like, well, you'll get it later, and then later it does click, and it's like, oh, okay, I understand that now, and a lot of that has to do with just sort of the nature of magic, also, because magic does factor into this quite heavily. The tradition I'm in is it's a sorceress lineage. And so there's an emphasis on magic and personal, the cultivation of one's personal power. And so, the thing is with magic is, like, a lot of times people will kind of go searching for answers, especially if they're, really trying to learn magic and trying to kind of learn the forbidden knowledge and the secrets. And unfortunately, a lot of it is difficult to put into words. And I think that also carries into experiences with spirits as well, as a lot of times it can be really difficult to put into words exactly what it was like. Maybe I can describe something I saw with my physical eyes, or a vision I saw, or something I heard with my physical ears, but there also is usually these accompanying inner sensations as well. And I think that can be one of the reasons why a lot of people don't try to even, share their experiences, because it can be, so much of it can be a very particular sense of knowing that goes along with the physical experience as well, if that makes sense. So, it's one of those things where magic can be taught and you can guide somebody and learn the techniques, but a lot of the most interesting things that you can learn are oftentimes more easily learned from spirits, because they have a certain way of communicating with people that doesn't have to just be in words. They can cause people to feel sensations, or to see visions, or to just kind of have, I guess, what some people will call like a download of information. You suddenly just know how to do this, or you suddenly just know what the answer to this is. And that's a really huge component, especially in, magical traditions that are either shamanistic or have shamanistic elements, or witchcraft lineages and things like that. It's very much about learning from the spirits. And so there are ways, again, that a human teacher can guide you and kind of point you in the direction. But a lot of the most interesting things that you learn, and some of the more complex things, and I guess what some people might call like advanced things that you can learn, are really going to come directly from those spirits. And as well, they're the ones that are the guardians of that knowledge. I could tell somebody how to do something, if I was allowed to, how to do something that a spirit taught me, but it may not really make sense to them, or it may not work particularly well for them, because they don't have that, that line, that thread, that spiritual thread of initiation, or connection to a particular being or set of beings that grants that power, or that is sort of the catalyst for that power, if that makes sense. So, it's interesting, because I think this difficulty of putting it into words kind of not only really applies to the magical side of things, but to just these spiritual experiences in general. And it definitely, from the, the people that I've heard on your show before, it definitely seems like that is the case for a lot of people. So, there is that element to it.
Yeah, very definitely. I find with my, the experiences that I've had too, it's almost like, it's not like you hear words in your head. Well, it's very different all the time, because it could just be a vision of something, a picture of something, whether that's an object being given to you, or so I've had something placed in my lap at one point before, and sort of trying to figure out what did that mean, and or you will see somebody or a being appear, and they direct you to a place, and suddenly you see a vision of where that place is, or what that thing is. It's kind of it's non-verbal. I've always just assumed that's because I'm a very visual person, but I guess that is, and I guess if you're maybe sort of more clairaudient, for instance, then you might hear words, or have other kind of impressions, according to in which way you're most open to these messages to come to you. But for me, I'm a very visual person, so they've mostly, although I have heard words before, they've mostly come to me in vision. So it is a very interesting thing, and I agree. I think that is, it's another feature of these experiences.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether you got to meet any other fairy seers during your training, and whether you got to kind of hear what it was like for other people. Obviously, you had your teacher and what they would have passed on to you. But were there any other people training at the same time as you?
Yes, but not as much alongside me at the same time, which is kind of still the case. We're a little spread out, so but I do know other fairy seers. I have a friend who is a fairy seer who is from a completely different tradition, in a different part of the world. But he has a similar kind of situation to me. And he definitely has, it's been really interesting because, again, because he's from a different part of the world, it's fun to kind of see the overlap of, well, what's the same and what's different. And I would say there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. But, it can be a bit of because my tradition is very insular, it's not, it's actually pretty rare that we're public, about, and obviously, like, I keep a lot of things very private about myself, but, this is still considered me being, more public. And even before I was kind of doing, offering my services online and stuff like that through like a website, I was really just kind of doing stuff for people by word of mouth in person. And people that I knew, and then they would tell somebody, oh, yeah, I know somebody who can help you with this, and, things like that. So, it was kind of one of those, it's a little unusual that I'm even as public as I am, which is, the case with a lot of, especially when you kind of move more into the sort of witchcraft lineages. They tend to be very secretive and quiet. Obviously, there are some quite public traditions out there that people are aware of, or some of them even publish books and things like that. But there are quite a lot of, whether it's like a family tradition or just, a gathering of various people, or even one or two people over time, it's often quite secret. And so, which, it has its utility and its purpose to keep these things secret, whether it's just, because of privacy reasons and, or even danger. I mean, I think especially people who kind of grow up in the Western world, it's easy to think of like, well, magic is fine. And, we can talk about this stuff publicly, but there's a lot of places in the world still where, it's quite dangerous to, practice magic publicly or, give any sort of hint that you do. So, that can be a factor as well as to why a lot of these traditions are very secretive. Again, as we kind of touched on earlier, there are, especially when it comes to the fairy side of things, it can be because there are those secrecy taboos and oaths that are made about not speaking on certain things or only speaking about certain aspects of it and things like that. It's frustrating because there's a lot of stuff that I wish I could just kind of like spill a lot of more detail about because it's interesting, at least to me. But it's something that you have to kind of be careful of when you do have those oaths and things like that, because it's great to share, but it's also more important for most people who are kind of dealing with these things to keep their spirit relationships and their relationships with their traditions intact. So. But I like to share what I can, and I also, kind of going back to what you said, I want people to know that there are, you kind of said something earlier about like some of these experiences are very almost movie-like, very kind of Hollywood. And it actually makes me sad when I see people online who kind of water magic down or water down experiences that people are capable of having with spirits, because some of the things that happen, they may be kept hidden, but they can be quite extraordinary. I've seen things that are really incredible and quite miraculous. So, and I know that things like magic and, many types of spirits are capable of really incredible feats. And I want people to know that that's the truth and the case, because I think it's, even if somebody isn't pursuing, a magic, practice or anything like that, I think it's still great for people to know that these types of things exist in the world. It makes the world more magical. It makes the world more interesting. And it's, to me, I feel it's a hopeful, worldview that anything is possible. And I feel like, especially in the times that we live in now, when people are very kind of isolated and everybody is just kind of talking through the internet, and there's of course all kinds of political unrest and things like that. It can really rejuvenate people, even if they just decide, well, that's out there, and knowing that that's out there and that it's possible. I feel like it brings joy to my existence. So I think it can be something joyful for other people as well.
I love that. I'm 100% with you there. And is that kind of why you decided to become a bit more public? Is this because, I'm thinking about my work, and I know I never really chose to do any of this, but I felt called to it. Is it the same for you? And obviously you have what you do on the one hand, and that comes from, is that family lineage?
Yes, and yes, kind of.
Okay. But so, was this aspect of kind of going more public, do you feel that that's part of your calling?
I'm not sure. For me, again, like when before I kind of had like my website and stuff like that, again, I was kind of just word of mouth. And I actually, I kind of kept to myself. I was sort of, I would check out forums and blogs and people's social media and stuff like that that had to do with like magic and things like that. But I kind of kept to myself until I met a few people who I really clicked with, who were also practitioners, and they started to introduce me to other people, sort of their internet community, and people started to ask me within those communities for readings, advice, scrying training, things like that. So I was just like, well, I might as well just kind of see what happens, and kind of put myself out there. And I actually did have to kind of convince, the spirits a little bit of like, I know I'm supposed to kind of keep things secret, and on the down low, but I think there's a way I can do that still, but maybe see if there's a way to kind of expand, my services to people. And there was definitely some reluctance from within my tradition, on that, but I was like, let's just see what happens, and I'll be very, cautious about not breaking my oaths, obviously, but also, not sharing too much private information and things like that. And it's been pretty cool for the most part. I really didn't expect, like, the first podcast I went on was a friend's podcast, The Frightful Howls. And so,
yeah, I listened to that when I was trying to remember the name of it. I knew it was I was going to say howling. I didn't want to get it wrong.
Yeah,
but I listened.
Frightful Howls. Yeah,
that was the one. That was the one that somebody in my Patreon. I'm not sure if it was Arthur in my.
I think
Patreon.
It was. Yeah.
He that shared it there. And we all listened to it, and that's right. That is the first one I heard, and it was a great interview. It was it was lovely.
Thank you.
Chatting with each other, because you could tell, it was a really nice sort of friendship between you all, and it was a very enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, and that was, I didn't really plan on doing anything like that, or I didn't reach out to the people that have very graciously, such as yourself, invited me to come talk. But when it presented itself, I was like, yeah, let's do it. Why not? Because I think also too, I wanted to kind of put another voice out there that is more kind of that traditional folkloric mindset. I think there's there's of course a lot of misinformation, and people kind of I think it's getting better now. I think especially Morgan Daimler has been really great about this, of kind of reminding the general public, like, hey, like, there's folklore about this, like there's there's an original mythology and an original anecdotal experiences that kind of teach us about these beings and things like that. And I really like that. And I think it's really important that people, not just for safety's sake, to kind of know how to interact with these beings, but also because it's a form of preservation, for these traditions and the fairy faith in general and things like that. So I was really excited to kind of do that, because I was like, well, I know these people, and I know they'll ask great questions, and also, they're kind of a similar mindset to me, and I'll be able to kind of talk about things from that more traditional folkloric mindset and point of view, and share that with people, and kind of see where it goes from there, you know?
Yeah. When you're talking about the kind of secrecy of it all, I'm just imagining a cloak. It's like being cloaked. I'm thinking cloaked, and that has sort of magical kind of connotations in itself, that you need to wear this cloak, and it feels appropriate. That word cloaked somehow feels really appropriate for what you're doing, and it, by way of being able to bring it to the public. Now, I know that a lot of people will be very interested to know what kinds of situations you are called to deal with. Are you able to share any of the kind of situations that you might have to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny because I remember I was in a Discord server a while back, and I had mentioned that, like, I do, these types of services for people, and somebody asked, like, do people still have the same problems now that they had, back in the day? and it's like, those same issues still arise. It can run the gamut from things that are less serious to things that are quite complex. Everything from, somebody just wanders into the wrong forest at the wrong time, and now, a being is upset and is kind of, changing their luck and kind of messing with them, to something that is much more serious, and sort of everything from, generational issues where an ancestor, and this is actually quite common. I've had multiple clients that have had issues such as this, where an ancestor that can go back quite far had some sort of negative interaction with a being, a fairy being. And, the thing with the good folk is that they're quite old, and they also, time doesn't really work the same for them in general. And obviously that is something we also see in the folklore of, like, when people, when humans are kind of brought into the world of fairy, when they come back, a lot more time has passed, or a lot less time has passed, things like that. So, their sense of time is definitely, from everything that I've experienced and been told by those beings, is quite different for them. And so, 1,000 years ago, or even 100 years ago, oh, this person, upset me. Well, oh, now it's 100 years later, and I'm still messing with their descendants because of that. That's actually really common, is like that kind of weird ancestral stuff. And so, a lot of times it can be really beneficial for somebody, if they're having these issues, to come to somebody who's an experienced professional, and knows how to kind of treat and deal with these things, or can negotiate with the beings and things like that, to finally, shrug off these ancestral issues. The other thing too is, sometimes people are having experiences that aren't negative, but they are quite intense, or they're just confusing or shocking, and the person is just not prepared, and so they need guidance to kind of figure out, well, why is this even happening? How do I deal with it? Can I not deal with it if I don't want to? And so having somebody that can kind of mediate between them and these spirits is definitely wise in those occasions. Another thing too that a lot of people ask about is whether fairies, pursue humans romantically. They definitely do. Not always, but it's something that we of course see in the folklore and sort of anecdotal accounts. And yes, it still goes on today. I should mention though, and I if people have heard me on other podcasts, they probably heard me say this before, but it's not something I would ever recommend somebody seek out. Don't go out there trying to, like, get a fairy boyfriend. Like, it's just not wise. But these spirits do pursue people, romantically or sexually, and so that is something that can be really confusing, really terrifying at times for people. And, they may not even understand, like, what is this thing that's pursuing me? Is it a fairy? Is it a ghost? things like that. So that's something that I've definitely helped people with a number of times. And, sometimes you can mediate that and make it something that is actually a blessing in someone's life. But then other times it's something where you have to just go, this being needs to be separated from this person because they're too overwhelming, or they're outright violent, or too controlling, or whatever. They're just making the person sick because the person doesn't want anything to do with them, things like that. So and it can be quite delicate. These, as I'm sure you and many of your listeners know, these beings are quite powerful. They have, again, as I said earlier, they have a lot of capability of affecting the physical world more than a lot of other types of spirits might. And so it can be quite frightening for people when these things are going on. And so having somebody who can not only mediate those things, but also find a solution depending on what the situation is really beneficial for whatever the situation might be. So those are some things. Some of the weirder stuff is probably stuff that I can't really talk on because I don't want to give away my clients' privacy. But there's definitely a lot of really strange stuff, and there's definitely a lot of the same stuff that you read about, in the folklore and in people's accounts and things like that. All of that still goes on. These beings are still very much here and part of the landscape, the spiritual landscape and the physical landscape. And so, all of those that different gamut of experiences still happens, definitely.
Do you get called upon by clients all over the world?
Yeah, I do. I have people. I have people from Europe, the U.S. I've had people from the Middle East. I believe I've also, I've had some people from African countries. I would say probably Europe, Western and Northern Europe are probably the most common for European clientele, and then all over the United States as well.
It's really interesting. I was wondering also about how you feel kind of fairy seership may have shifted over the years, because one of my patrons, Katrina, was funny enough, we were just sort of chatting, what's everyone up to today, because it was a really nice day here. It was really sunny in the UK, well, where I am anyway, and it seems to be in other places in the UK. And she was actually reading a book today about fairy doctors. And I said, well, that is so interesting because, of course, she didn't know that I was speaking to you this evening. And so I said to her, would you have any questions? And she had kind of given a version of something that I was also interested. She was asking whether you feel there's now a resurgence of those of us called to be fairy doctors or fairy seers or fairy sorceresses, whether they be wise women or men. And what do you think about that? Do you think people are being called, and how have you found it sounds as if you've been fairly busy as a fairy seer and sorceress. Do you feel it's changed in any way?
That's a really good question. I think it's something that's always been needed. I don't know that there's more people who are sort of being called to that, or born to that, or end up being kind of brought into it, because that's something that happens as well. Where somebody's kind of going about their life, and then some sort of experience happens. And then, the fairies go, okay, you work for us now. So, that's usually actually, when we're talking specifically about the term fairy doctor, that's usually kind of how it goes with that particular term. It's sort of somebody who ends up being a bit of a mediator, but also, at least the way that I've been taught and understand it, it's somebody who's sort of, often forcibly, brought into this sort of occupation of well, you work for us now, the fairies, and you're going to do this stuff for humans who have problems with us, or, you know, the people that we want to interact with and things like that. I think there's always been a good number of people who are called to this. I also think there's a lot of people who try not to fulfill that role, even if they're suited to it. You know, I definitely know people in a lot of circumstances, or of people in a lot of circumstances where they're, you know, it's very obvious that they have a talent for certain things that are magical or spiritual, but they want nothing to do with it, you know, and so they just kind of spend their life like trying to get away from that, you know, and trying not to acknowledge it or fulfill that. And, you know, sometimes that can have some dire consequences for them. I think a great example of that kind of situation is when you hear about, you know, the like shaman sickness and stuff like that. That's like a common thing in a lot of cultures with, you know, shamans and similar types of practitioners, that they develop illnesses, or they go through these, you know, really traumatic events. And the illness doesn't go away until they go, okay, fine, I'll become a shaman, you know, things like that. So, I'm not sure that I really couldn't tell you. I'm not sure if there's more people that are sort of emerging with those, proclivities or those gifts or, you know, experiences. But I definitely think that there will always be people like that. And I think it will always be something that is needed and, beneficial to both humans and fairy beings, you know, because it benefits them as well, not just humans. You know, if a fairy wants something done, or they want something from a person, you know, even if it's just, hey, I want you to do this for me, or I want to talk to you or whatever, if the person doesn't know how to communicate with them, or can't fulfill those things, then somebody like myself, or another type of, you know, mediator, can help them with that. And so it really benefits both humans and fairies. And I think that's why it's so necessary to have people that do those things. Whether they are more public about it, or they just, you know, work within their village, or, you know, their local neighborhood. I think that it'll always be something that's necessary. Definitely.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Rose. And you know, just hearing you there, I was struck by the fact that, you know, for a lot of people, we still carry in our very being how people suffered in the past for connecting with otherworld on behalf of them, you know. And it's like we carry that in our ancestry, we carry that within us, and so it's no surprise when, you know, sometimes I meet people, if I'm doing a healing session with them, and they have some kind of block around connecting in with their spirituality, or connecting in with whatever they see as God, or the all, or source, you know. And it goes back to often that there's a really good reason why they kind of put the brakes on, is because remembering something, they're remembering the pain and the trauma. You know, so it's really understandable, but at the same time, you know, if it's your path, then it will be made very clear. And like the shaman story that you just, you know, pointed towards, if you keep coming up against these closed doors, or, you know, illness, and always being put back on that path, eventually, you listen. And then life begins to flow again. But I guess maybe a healing sometimes has to take place there for that person, enable them to feel safe, that in this day and age, at least at the moment, who knows what happens in future, but at least at the moment, it feels safer, at least, than it did in the past. In most places, as you say, it's not everywhere. There are still really dreadful things happening to people in other cultures if they are seen as being connected with other world. We always have to bear that in mind. But well, it's been so wonderful to speak with you, and I feel like I've learned loads just just by having this short conversation with you tonight. So, you must come back on another time, and it would be great to talk some more. And I, like you, the work of Morgan Daimler very much underpins all of what you've spoken about as well. She's released. They've released some excellent books on the subject. Do you think you might be releasing? Have you thought of writing a book on the subject?
I have some things in the works. I can't. I can't say exactly yet, but I have a couple things that I've been working on for quite a while. One of them I think is closer to kind of coming to fruition sooner than the other, because I'm taking my time a little bit with the other. But I will definitely, I will be on your Discord, on my socials, all that stuff, kind of sharing it whenever that release date is, definitely. And hopefully people kind of dig that. But, and thank you so much for having me. This was a super delightful conversation. And as you know, I love the podcast, so I would be happy to come back anytime. And thank you so much for inviting me on, but also just having this platform. I think I've expressed this to you before, but I really appreciate that you're doing this work and that you have this platform where people can talk about these things and not feel like they're going to be judged or, patronized about it. And I think it's just really important and wonderful work that you're doing. And I'm very honored and grateful to be a part of it. So thank you so much, Jo.
Oh, thank you. And likewise, really appreciate all you're doing too. And I know there'll be people out there that want to, connect with you. And do you have some classes coming up, or some way that people can contact you if they have something that they want to discuss with you?
I do, yeah. So I have a website where people can kind of read a little about me and contact me there. It's just roseauroras.com. There's a little S at the end there, at the end of my name, just because it was easier for the URL. Yeah. So that's my website. And then the only social media I really use is Instagram. And again, it's just at Rose Auroras. There's no spaces or anything like that. And as I mentioned earlier, I do readings for people. Obviously, if folks are having some issues with spirits of all types, not just fairies, but if people are having issues with human dead and or trolls, or they don't know what's going on, feel free to hit me up and we can take a look at it and see what's going on. I also, I do teach people one-on-one. I do scrying training, and I have students that I mentor ongoing in the magical arts. So if people want to learn to develop their mediumship or their psychic abilities, they can hit me up about that. And then I believe it's in August. Yes. In August, I am presenting again at the Salem Witch Fest, the online portion, and I am presenting a class about the Celtic fairies. So I believe tickets are online now. I think they just put them up a couple weeks ago. So if people want to check that out, I think it's just salemwitchfest.com. And there's a lot of other really great classes on there. A lot of people that I'm friends with are also doing classes. So for folks who are interested, please be sure to check out the full roster. But and then I did teach a class last year at Salem Witch Fest about the Scandinavian elves, which is also just on the website. If you look through the archives, you'll see it, and you can also check that out. It's I think it went really well, and I tend to be a bit of a goofball in my classes, and I use a lot of memes to talk about things. So if people like that kind of casual format, then I think they'll dig it. But that's what I got going on.
That's great. When is the Salem?
It's in August. So there is, if people want to go to Salem in person, they will have a fest in person there. But during that weekend, there's also going to be online classes, and my class is online. So people don't have to be there. They can just, check it out online from wherever they are.
Well, that's really good for us over, in Britain and other places, if we make it over there. So that's fantastic. Great. Okay. Well, thanks again, and yeah, I look forward to chatting with you soon. It's been really lovely, and yeah, I look forward to everything that you've got coming up, and particularly your release whenever that is too. So yeah, I'll catch you at a class too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Spectrovision Radio.